The biggest difficulty I faced is honestly losing friends at the pace and the rate that you do, given the size of this conflict. You know, that was something I was unprepared for. I mean, like U.S. military history for the Marines, like the bloodiest battle we'd had in the last 20 years was an IED killed like 30 Marines. That was like one day, biggest loss of life we'd had in 2 decades of war. And that's a bad day on a position here. So it's definitely for either side. So it's like it's definitely just the size of this was a little. It can catch you off guard if you don't know what you're walking into.
Hi folks, my call sign is Seattle. I'm International Cooperation Lead at Azov 1, and today I'm talking to call sign Uno. Uno is Corporal at the Azov International Battalion. Hi Uno.
Hi.
So Uno, you are from the United States, right?
Yes.
But where exactly are you from?
I'm from San Diego, California.
Great. So there is a big naval base there, right? And you grew up perhaps, seeing those surroundings. Was that a factor influencing your decision to join the military?
Yeah, I would say partially. I mean, like San Diego Harbor, you have massive naval presence there. Yeah. And just a few miles up the coast, there's a massive Marine base, a couple, and so you see Marines and sailors and soldiers out and about. Just wherever you go in Southern California. So it's definitely, being around that culture, you become more familiar with it.
Yeah. Call signs are always interesting to discuss, but I feel like your call sign is particularly interesting. Given your life experience, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Uno was given to me by a couple of friends when I was in the Marines. We had all read a book together, and there was kind of a character in this book that had one eye and was called Uno. So there was an event in the Marines in which I lost the function of my left eye, and when I donned the eye patch at the time to protect it and cover it, because honestly it was very ugly. They kind of just stuck, and then coming out here, it was kind of already a nickname I had, and everybody just used it.
What military branch do you come from? What is your military experience there?
Oh, okay. I was in the U.S. Marines for almost 5 years, just about 5 years.
Right.
And came here.
Excellent. So that is considered one of the elite forces in the United States, right? Why did you decide to join the Marines specifically? Were there any interesting stories behind that decision?
So the Marines kind of have a very specific energy in the U.S. and like kind of an aura around them. And I grew up in an Army family, but my grandpa had done a lot of fighting for the U.S. in a few different wars, and he always had a very high respect for the Marines. And he'd always, even with what he'd done in the Army and as a soldier, he always talked about the Marines with kind of like a reverence. And so I think some of that seeped into me. But ultimately, when it came down to it, on my 17th birthday, I went to join the Army. And I was just kind of asking them about what the difference was and like what I could do. And the Army recruiter just told me, like, I can give you everything the Marines can. The only thing that I can't give you that they can is the title of Marine. And I was like, sold. Thank you for your time. Have a great day. I walked next door and signed the papers. And that was kind of how I ended up in the Marine Corps.
Great. So what specialties do you have as a U.S. Marine?
I was a 0351 infantry assaultman, an 0311 rifleman, and a scout swimmer, which is, so I specialized in high explosives organic to the infantry, as well as frontline infantry, small unit tactics, and engagements as an infantryman, as a rifleman, and then as well as amphibious reconnaissance.
Right. That's quite a broad area of skills. Which of those skills do you feel were particularly useful for you here in Ukraine later?
Infantry skills, for sure. The Marine Corps, I was skeptical as how well prepared I was coming here originally. I came here in pursuit of some other Marines that I'd known and served with, and ultimately those skills transferred very well. But I was very surprised.
Excellent. So California is half the globe away from Ukraine. Did you know a lot about Ukraine before you came here?
Actually, not much at all. I had been, as a younger boy, I had was privy to the annexation of Crimea and the Donbos War. I'd grown up hearing about that a little bit. I had always been kind of immersed in military culture because of my family and the people that surrounded me. So there was always the wonder, especially in 2014, if the US would respond. Yeah. So I'd always kind of heard about it. But it wasn't until the full-scale invasion that it became a household name and something that everybody talked about. And then still even years later when I came to Ukraine to help and fight, it was when I learned the most about it. I realize now that I knew almost nothing before I got here.
So when did you come to Ukraine?
I came to Ukraine in the beginning of 2024.
Right. And what was your first impression after arriving to the country? What was the most surprising thing that you saw here?
I was very surprised by a lot of things. One, I just kind of had this notion in my head that like everything was fighting. And then when I crossed the border in Western Ukraine and it was just as peaceful as like Poland, I was like, oh, okay. And then when I arrived at Kyiv, I was very surprised by like high rises and everything. I don't know what this image was that was in my mind. That was more like villagey. So like when you go out to some of the villages in Ukraine and you'll see like the odd goat tied to a fence post, I kind of thought that was Ukraine. And then I got here and I'm like scanning, menus and the banking systems here and everything's so sophisticated. And I was just very impressed and very surprised by like some of the technological amenities that you guys have that we don't have in the US. I was like, oh, what the hell? I was very, very caught off guard by that.
Awesome. So you come from the military family.
Yes.
Was that easier for you to break your news about your decision to go to Ukraine, or actually it was harder?
Depending on the family member. Mm-hmm. So my grandmother took it especially hard. I'm my father's only son, and my father has passed away, and my grandfather's passed away. So my grandmother just initially thought she went ballistic. Mm-hmm. But my mother and my siblings took it pretty well. I mean, they all knew me as a Marine, and they kind of knew that this is where I set in most naturally in life, and this is how I work. Mm-hmm. Honestly, my mother's response is she was just happy it wasn't my brother. He is also a soldier, but his skill set, his specialties, that of like a mechanic and a truck driver, and he wanted to come over and fight. And my mother's response was kind of like, if anybody can do it, you can do it because you have the skills and the experience. I'm just glad your brother's not going because she thought he would get himself hurt. And I thought that was funny.
So in a way, you too could have ended up here in Ukraine. Do you keep in touch with your brother regularly?
Yes, so we talk a lot, actually. He's half Ukrainian. His father's Ukrainian, and his grandparents on his father's side are from Ukraine and speak Ukrainian. He speaks a decent amount, so his natural instinct was he wanted to come back and fight, and I just kind of beat him to it. And it was very funny because, once I came here, he kind of realized he couldn't, because if both of her sons went, she would actually freak out. But she was kind of like, Uno can do it. He'll be fine. He'll be fine. And my brother's gonna hate if he watches this. But Uno can do it. He'll be fine. But Steven's not going. Everything's okay. I know Uno will come back. He'll be unscathed.
A story of sibling rivalry, but also responsibility to the mother, who is really deeply worried about.
Yes. Yeah. And my brother was very supportive. When I decided to come, he immediately sent me all the money he had saved for equipment, so I could buy nicer equipment and things like that. He was very supportive, and he keeps in touch, sends me things when I need it. We talk a lot. Yeah.
So you mentioned that as a U.S. Marine, you're quite prepared for what was ahead of you in terms of military experience. Was there something that you felt was lacking in your knowledge, in your experience about military craft?
So, I mean, obviously through the years of war here, different doctrines and techniques have developed, especially within your higher echelon and higher tiered units. There were different just tools of the trade I got to add to my toolbox upon learning them here. But ultimately, my first time in combat here, I felt more or less very comfortable, very prepared for the gunfight that I was in. There are things that we don't plan for, like artillery and drones, that is not heavily specified given the US's recent military history. We have not encountered a lot of these dangers, so there's definitely adjustments to be made. But as far as drones go, not really anybody has a good counter to it yet, so I was kind of just as unprepared as anybody else.
Exactly.
So I didn't feel like I was too far behind, but I definitely was able to learn a lot here, which was nice.
Excellent. As the war progressed and as you stayed on the battlefield, what became the biggest challenge for you, would you say? Are those drones? Are those more sophisticated electronic warfare systems?
So there's definitely an adjustment given the capabilities of the Russian Federation and their military. I mean, like coming from the US where you're the predominant military power on the planet and nobody can keep up with us, and now we're the ones getting airstriked, and it's a huge flip.
Yes.
I can imagine how some of our previous enemies must have felt fighting us in the past, but the drones don't bug me as much. The drones bug a lot of people. I definitely understand the fear because of how disconnected it seems from like close combat. But ultimately, in my mind, it's just another guided munition. We've had guided missiles for decades, and it's just a more accurate one. Artillery, you can train for that. Honestly, after a while with artillery, you kind of lose respect for it. Which is bad. It's not good, but you get used to it, and your subconscious kind of thinks like, it's never hurt me yet. Why would it hurt me now? Which is just dumb, but the biggest difficulty I've faced is honestly losing friends at the pace and the rate that you do, given the size of this conflict. That was something I was unprepared for. I mean, like U.S. military history for the Marines, like the bloodiest battle we'd had in the last 20 years was an IED killed like 30 Marines. That was like one day, biggest loss of life we'd had in 2 decades of war. And that's a bad day on a position here. So it's definitely for either side. So it's like it's definitely just the size of this was a little. It can catch you off guard if you don't know what you're walking into.
Yeah, that's a good illustration of the high intensity of the conflict here that many folks just don't realize, perhaps. So, Uno, what was your first impression when you arrived in Ukraine?
Honestly, I was just very impressed with the country as a whole. It's just extremely beautiful, and I was very taken aback by that.
Yeah. Is there something in Ukraine that you like more than in the United States?
The food quality has got to be it. You guys have very, very natural, very good food.
Yeah.
And that was very refreshing.
Is there anything you like in particular in terms of a dish or snack?
I think everybody likes borscht.
Yep.
But it's got to be borscht, I guess.
Yes. Your favorite. Good. Did you have an opportunity to test some new hobbies? What do you like to do in your spare time here in Ukraine?
I used to go clubbing a lot out here. That was always kind of fun. It was a way to decompress.
Yeah.
Kind of, and I like to dance. I like music a lot.
Cool.
I also like working out, and these are all things that are readily available in different places in Ukraine. So I got to explore a lot of that, which I hadn't done a lot of before.
Have you found like a club that you really like in Ukraine and could recommend to folks watching?
Nothing really specific. Just any place where there's loud music is usually fun to me.
Works for you, right? Have you discovered any Ukrainian music? Maybe artists, bands, depending on your music tastes?
Actually, yes. The bulk of the music I listen to is Ukrainian now.
Cool.
Yaktak, Boombox, Skavka. These are all groups and artists that I've really kind of dived into.
Great.
And have become kind of the bulk of my taste in music.
Yeah. Do you recommend any of them to new recruits in the battalion? When they join, you have to check them out.
If you're a new recruit, I'd start off with something like Your Coach.
Yeah.
Yeah, something a little bit more hard, something a little bit to get you pumped up for what's coming.
Yeah.
But, when it comes down to relaxing, the other three I mentioned, that they take up a lot of my free time.
You made this decision to come to Ukraine after the war had been raging for 2 years already, right? And so you've seen combat footage, you've already seen a lot of news of what was happening on the battlefield. Was it easier or more difficult for you to make that decision after seeing all this news?
I wanted to come at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. I got my passport ready and I was in touch with the Ukrainian embassy. The issue is that I was still actively in the Marine Corps. And my ex-girlfriend convinced me to stay and just wait out my contract, and if the war was still going, go. And I had her blessing. And then it was funny because like 6 months before I got out, we broke up, and I was like, oh, okay. And then my buddy called me up, and obviously over the last 2 years I'd watched the footage and I was terrified, just because of some of the mechanisms of this war are revolutionary in terms of combat and mechanisms of killing. One thing that scares everybody is like the drones that I talked about. Watching the videos and just how published and how televised all of this combat could be, and how much of this you could actually see, it either desensitizes you or makes it much more real. So I had this fear that like, what if I didn't go? Like, what if I backed out on it after I told my friend I would come? So I immediately told all my friends and family. So I couldn't back out because I didn't want to look like, I didn't want to look bad. So I kind of forced myself into a position where I had to come. And then I just stuck with what I'd said I would do. And I kept my friend in the back of my mind. It was scary. I was pretty mortified and kept wondering if I'd made the right decision, but I'm here.
Amid those dark moments, in particular when you lose your brothers in arms and go through very tough times, are there any spiritual things that you cling to and which support you in this grueling battle?
Yes, absolutely. I think that I find it hard to believe that anybody can do this job without some of those items, some of those things in the back of your mind. I try to adopt the idea that whenever I go into combat and I'm conducting an assault or doing something like this, if it's my time, there's no piece of body armor that can save me, and if it's not my time, there's not a single Russian munition that can kill me, and I kind of rely on that. I've been in some pretty bad spots where I kind of like I'd lost friends in that moment, and other people were crippled or wounded. And in my soul, I knew I was going to die. I knew that it was my turn now. There was no way I could get out of this. But I also had come to terms and accepted that the decisions I made had brought me here. And there was no turning back. So the only thing I could do was try, just have faith. And ultimately, at the end of all those situations, I'm still alive. And there's definitely times that not even my friends who were there with me can explain, where I knew for a fact something had helped me, like something stopped the bullets. There was no way. I've had moments where I've laid out my gear and just inspected for a bullet hole that maybe my plate had caught around, because there was no possible way that I didn't get hit. And for some reason, I've seemed pretty untouchable. Yeah.
That's impressive. So you decided to join Azov. What was the key motivations for you in that decision?
Azov, I mean, it's a pretty well-known name, especially here in Ukraine. Russian propaganda has done a lot to try and stigmatize it. But from the beginning, I had Ukrainian friends who kind of shared with me what Azov really was, and the principles it stands for, and the idea of a future Ukraine, the idea of the nation that it wants and that it strives for. And ultimately, as I fought through different units and fought through this conflict and navigated my own path in Ukraine, those principles and the things the pillars that Azov stands on became more and more familiar to me, and I realized how much it was like Marine Corps culture, which was already very familiar to me. The concept of brotherhood and the concept of just good men and good women and good people coming together to try and do something. Not that that doesn't stretch throughout the entirety of the ZSU, but Azov has a name it has for a reason and is very firm on these principles. And it was just something that resonated with me a lot, and it was very familiar to me coming from the culture I'd come from. And so when my friend had called me and said, hey, there's an idea for a new kind of unit within the 12th SSO Brigade, I said, what's up? Let me hear it. And he gave it to me, and I said, all right. And I was all in, and now we're here.
Great. Were there any challenges in the process of joining the Azov International Battalion?
Not necessarily the process of joining. It's pretty fluid, but the process of building has been more or less complex.
Tell us more about it.
They're just the kinks that you run into. You know, you have because it's an international unit, we run into the same complexities that most international units run into. I mean, this unit is very young. We don't have hundreds of years of military history to compound on, like the French Foreign Legion might, for example, where they're very rigid and structured, and everything's been kind of tested, and it worked or it didn't, and implemented to create a perfect pipeline. And we've kind of had to figure that out on the fly. And it's worked, but it's interesting when you get this many people from this many backgrounds, and all in the same place, even different backgrounds within Ukraine, so different methodology and different ideologies, and you're kind of melting them together for a common goal. And that can be a strength and a weakness. So navigating that in the very beginning was interesting, but we figured it out, and it's working.
So when any problems or difficulties arise in Azov, how are they solved?
So one of the strengths of Azov is, at least in my opinion, is that the rank structure here, it's not so vertical as it is linear. So it's the youngest soldat, the most basic, lowest soldat has a say in anything and can always speak his opinion. And he will be listened to and weighed by the others. So navigating these issues instead of just one person, one pinnacle person being like, this is what we will do, and if it does not work, we will do this. You know, everybody kind of gets an input, and as a collective, we weigh what would be the best. And it's made solving these issues very easy and navigating them very, very simple, since we have so much perspective to pull from and such a wide range of individuals that have input. I mean, we've got Ukrainians in the unit, and we've got foreigners from almost every Western country you can name. And it's good. It's very good, because we can pull from anywhere. And there's always somebody with a better idea than somebody else. And ultimately, you reach what solves the problem.
As of now, do you feel like your service in Azov uses your potential, your experience, and your skills in the best measure possible? Or do you have, some plans on, growing and expanding your skills?
I consider myself a student of the craft, so there's always more I can learn. I've dove way more into my medical knowledge than some medics I know, and that was just to expand my own personal knowledge. So I wouldn't say that there's not things I'm chasing, because I believe, like, as a soldier, as a good soldier at least, you never know enough. and you're never good enough. So I'm always trying to learn new concepts and train new things. But in reference to the position which I hold in the brigade and in the battalion, and my specialty within the battalion, it's up my alley. It's where the majority of my experience comes from, and I do believe it's where I can help the best. I didn't come with a heavy notion of what I wanted to do within the brigade or within the battalion, but I offered it up to my leaders, some of which who have known me for a long time, and knew of my reputation, or perhaps soldiers that I worked with, and by proxy me. And I asked them what they thought I could help with the most. And that's the position I was put in, to benefit the battalion the best. And I think it works.
How does the leadership of the battalion ensure that your skills and your expertise are put to best use?
The leadership in the battalion is some of these men are legends within Ukraine and within not only like the foreigner side of the foreigner community, which is a relatively small, close-knit community, but also within the entirety of the military forces of Ukraine. And there's almost limitless experience to pull from, starting at our battalion commander, localized to the battalion at least, starting from our battalion commander and down to our 2IC, Frodo, and everybody else in between, all the way down to the company commander and then me. These men have the best experience and the most experience, and they're in these positions because they not only just survived the battles they were in, but they learned from them, and they're really the best people for the job. This was the first time in any military unit I've ever been in where I wasn't critical of one of my leaders or one of my commanders, where it's like, how did this guy get put in this position? I know why every single one of these men is in the position they're in, and this is the best place they could be. And so when I kind of offered my skill set up to them and was like, where can you best use me? I trusted their judgment completely.
So you're also an instructor in the battalion, right?
Yes.
What is your core principle of coaching your recruits? So what do you try to instill in them?
I would say two things that are the most important.
Yeah.
I'd argue is one, discipline.
Yeah.
But and accountability.
Yeah.
Of yourself and of your teammates. But the biggest thing I try to give them is reality. I don't like to sugarcoat things. I want them to totally understand what it is they're doing here and what they will be doing, and the realities of it all.
Do you share any personal stories from your personal experience when you train them? Does that help?
Yes. I think a lot of the newer recruits, who have not yet fought here, everything for them has always been like a video on TikTok or the internet or something like this. And so when I get to share my personal experiences and my personal stories, I think it's different when it's someone they know and someone that they trust.
Yeah.
And I use it a lot of times to give examples for different things I'm teaching, different techniques or different things I'm talking about, just because it's real, and I try and only teach real things.
Yeah. We see some remnants of Russian aggression against Ukraine here. We are now, past 3 years of the full-scale war here. In your opinion, what should motivate Americans to keep supporting Ukraine at this very difficult time?
So, in my opinion, as Americans, we take pride in being like a bastion of freedom and liberty. And I think a lot of people have become susceptible or victims of like Eastern bias propaganda. And they kind of lose sight of this. And what I think is the biggest for like Americans to hear, those who may be skeptical or wanting to come here even, is that this is a real fight. This fight is hundreds of years old. It expands long before 2022 and long before 2014. And this is the legitimate struggle of a different people, of a sovereign nation trying to maintain its sovereignty and a real fight for freedom and the right to self-determine, the right to self-govern,
Yeah.
which is something that should speak to all Americans, and something that should hold a place in our hearts.
Yeah. How can Americans support Azov to keep on defending Ukraine?
I mean, there's always donations on the website. There's links to donations on the Azov website and on the Azov International website. But also just anything from posting, talking about it, to change the stigma that has been emplaced by the Russian Federation around the name Azov and around the organization that is Azov. And if you'd like to be more hands-on, you can always join.
Indeed. What would be your advice for those folks who are now considering joining Azov International Battalion?
Know what this is and know what we are doing here. Understand the history of this fight and what it will take from you and what you will have to give to it. I don't say that in a bad way. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you know, a lot of veterans of the Middle East and the war on terror and previous wars, they saw a lot of combat, but this is war. And I say that very heavily, and it's different. So just know what this is before you come and it surprises you.
Yeah. Ono, thank you so much for your honest assessment. Yeah, Ono, so I'm from Azov One. This is the official fundraising unit of the brigade. We try to provide high-tech protective equipment for our combat units. How can folks support us in provisioning for the combat units of the brigade?
Obviously, the biggest thing is going to be donations and routing them through your organization.
Yes.
From what I understand, you guys directly support us, and you just directly support all of the other combat units within the brigade, and the equipment's totally essential to us. It is quite literally the difference between life and death on the front. So donating either money or equipment, all things help. I mean, even if you have extra warming layers or anything like that, these donations are the lifeline of the units that are on the front. And I think it's important that people remember that.
Indeed. We want to thank all our current donors who are supporting our brigade through Azov One. Your donations make a big difference for our soldiers on the front lines. Thank you.